Ask Lovecraft After Dark 2.0, sort of, we're calling it. Tonight, I'm really excited to announce that we have Amber Fallon, a writer and editor, and all around New England type, I suppose. You're based out of New England, is that correct?
I am.
Fantastic. Amber has two collections that are out right now. One is that she's edited. There's Fright into Flight, which is the all-female stories of horror and nightmares all around flying. And the other is Wicked Weird, which is a similar collection, but all around New England. So I guess let's jump right into those. Fright into Flight was kind of born out of a little bit of controversy. Is that correct?
That is correct. I was kind of, I'll just be outright with it. I was a little upset about major anthologies having all male table of contents, especially when they're all white male. And it upset me a little bit. I posted about it online, and that was sort of where the initial idea came from. And I just really wanted to be able to show you that women can write scary stories about flight and that there were stories out there that could have been chosen. It was kind of like a, hey, you forgot something, here it is kind of a deal.
And why was I mean I guess the flight was the original sort of conceit for the first anthology, but once you sort of had this core nugget of flying, how did you go with that? How was it sort of selecting stories and trying to parse flying? Was it because it wasn't just airline flying? I mean that would be one particular way of playing with it, but you guys explored a lot of different angles.
We did, and it's sort of interesting to me because my first book, The Terminal, is about an airport and it takes place with a lot of airplanes, so there's a lot of flying in there. So it was kind of in my head already, but we did need to expand it. I couldn't just stick with airplanes and airports, although there are some really great stories in there about airports and airplanes. Um, but there's other flight in there as well. And I think that it was more of sort of a take wing thing. It kind of spun off into its own like sort of empowerment, just about, raising yourself up on wings, whether they're gossamer or they're the kind of like ripped up skeletal bat wing kind of things.
And did you discover a lot of new voices through this? Because it seems like this isn't give me my standard Cthulhu story or give me your take on Frankenstein. I mean this is sort of someone gives you the prompt flight. I can imagine that really brings very different writing to the foreground.
It's true. A lot of the stories in there are reprints, and the first thing I did was I wanted to seek out because the anthology that was all male on the similar theme was mostly reprints as well. So I kind of wanted to do a very similar. Let's see what's out there and what I can bring to this book. So I started looking at women that I really admire. Two who are in that book, not the only two, because I really love every story. I couldn't pick a favorite if you put a gun to my head. But Nadia Bulkin and Damien Angelica Walters both have really phenomenal takes on flight. Their stories are absolutely amazing and very, very different. So there's a lot of different themes and a lot of different elements and a lot of different voices, and flight was sort of this thing that kept them in the center. It was like the center of a centrifuge with everything else just sort of spinning madly around it.
Now, we've seen these a lot of all female anthologies coming out, usually in reaction to poor behavior. I'm thinking, of course, about the We She Walks in Shadows anthology that came out, the Women Destroy Horror or Women Destroy Sci-Fi. All of those kind of response anthologies. Did you guys have a lot of blowback? Did you receive folks sort of upset at this? Sort of the reaction to the reaction, or for the most part was it smooth sailing?
There was some. I mean, I still feel like there's a big sort of duality as far as approaching women in horror. There's this feeling that we're in this modern times here in the 2010s or however you want to say this decade. We're almost at 2020, and there's been a huge amount of progress, which is great, and not in just terms of women, but we're also seeing LGBTQIA authors. We're seeing all kinds of color, and that's awesome. but I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. I think we need more diverse voices. I think we need more diverse readership, which is something that I've really, really pushed for in the very, very forefront here. Diverse readers create a demand for diverse writers, and I think that that's sort of the sort of cyclical words are hard. The sort of cyclical thing that we need to create here. We want diverse readers who demand diverse stories, and then everybody benefits. The genre benefits, the readership benefits. We can bring people into the fold who might not have been able to identify with some of the characters in books that they've read before. I mean, I don't know about you, but I find it a lot easier to identify with the character when there's some commonality. And one of the frustrations when I was growing up as a girl reading, especially pulp, I've always been really, really drawn to pulp. And all of the protagonists are men. When you continuously see yourself sort of in the role of the victim or the damsel in distress, it can be kind of hard to enjoy the book. It can be kind of hard to get into it. So I feel like the more diverse perspectives that we have, the more people will sort of come to horror and the better that the genre will be as a result. And that was sort of a kind of circular way of saying that there's a reason we're still fighting.
Fact. You touched on terminals. So this was this your first novel or novella or?
Yep, it was my first novella, and it was a very interesting thing to write. It was because I'd been very used to doing flash fiction. That was really where I got my start. Really short stories. And then I moved on to longer short stories, and the novella was sort of the first foray into having a character live in my head for any real length of
Oh,
time. Yeah, I was used to one and done. Most of my short stories were written in a single sitting, and then I'd go back and do an editing session later. But the terminal took a couple of months. And part of it was written on a plane, part of it was written on a train, part of it was written on a boat. So there was a lot of transit here, and I'm stuck in this character's head. It was a very weird experience because I started like thinking about things in terms of the way that he would think about things. And he was a lot darker and more cynical than I tend to be. And there were moments when my husband was like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm fine. It's Dirk. He's still here."
Dirk's not at home right now. Well, transitioning like that has to be huge. I mean, I've talked to folks who, are used to this sort of short story world, and then trying to go to a novel, trying to just, I mean, it's the difference between sprinting and marathoning. How did you sort of work up to it, or did you just say, "All right, I'm doing this now, let's go"?
I got an opportunity and I said yes to it, and I made it work. And it was one of those things where, they made me an offer I couldn't refuse, so I did it. And it was a learning experience, but it was a great thing for me, and it sort of provided a stepping stone to writing other longer things and changing the way that I think and the way that I write. So it was a great process to go through.
Warblers was the novel after this, correct?
Right. Although technically speaking, Warblers was started before the terminal was started.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I try to have two projects going at any given time. I also like to have very, very different things going so that if I get kind of bored of one, I can jump to the other. So there's usually something pulpy and gory like the terminal going on, and then something a little bit more quiet, maybe a little bit more weird or Lovecraftian going on at the same time. That way I'm not too stuck in one world for too long of a period. And it also helps with that fresh perspective and fresh eyes. Um,
So I guess so I guess when you went back to Warblers and began to sort of finish it after Terminal was done, was it completely, did you have sort of a new perspective on it, having now known, okay, I can do this full, full story. How did the stories impact one another, I guess?
well, the biggest impact was thinking longer. Like, I generally, when I write, I will know I'll know how the story starts, and then I'll sort of have a patch in the middle, B, where I know where the conflict that has to happen is. And then I'll usually have a pretty good idea of how it ends. And the terminal sort of forced me to stretch that out, and instead of ABC, we added some other letters in between there, some numbers, and maybe weird Lovecraftian symbols. Um, And that applied very well to the Warblers when I had to step out of that space and say, okay, well, this probably isn't a short story because I'm not going to be able to say everything I want to say in, 5,000 words. I'm really going to have to push it a little longer.
Fantastic. And what was the response once you got these things out into the world? How did you, were folks going, "Oh, hey, this is she can write more than 2,000 words. What's going on?" Um,
Um, it was kind of interesting because I expected I don't know what I expected, honestly. The response in general was really positive, and that was super exciting. Just because the idea of people reading and enjoying things that I've written is still the most rewarding part of writing. I mean, that having somebody come up to me and say that I was their favorite author was the most amazing thing. I will never forget that moment. There was a little bit of backlash. The Terminal has a gay protagonist, and there was somebody who was very upset about this and felt the need to write me an email explaining in detail how he burned the book. Um,
Come on,
yeah,
guy. Okay.
I don't know. I mean, if I felt that strongly about something that I needed to go burn it, I don't think I would tell the author, but that's just me.
I mean, if you're throwing a tantrum and no one pays attention, did it really happen? That's fantastic. I'm doing a podcast right now that has gay characters and gay themes, and my writer and producer received mostly positive, but again, one or two, critiques saying, "Oh, this is too gay. This has too much gay content." And his response was for the second season to up the gayness and to print out T-shirts that say "Space is queer." So
Nice.
that's how we respond to these sort of things. Uh, Now, one thing I've loved about the way you talk about your writing is you're referring to it as junk food horror or guilty pleasure writing. Now, I'll often
Yep.
hear, people reading books say, "Oh, this is my guilty pleasure. Oh, this is kind of my sort of junk food reading." I don't know if I've ever come across an author who just leans into that. So, did you sort of do that purposefully, or just sort of look at the things you wrote and say, yeah, this is a Cheeto"?
I write what I love to read, and I've always, and even in movies and TV shows, I love the cheese. I love the gore. I love real cheese, your cheddar, your mozzarella, your Munster, of course. And I love things that just way over the top cheese factor. One of my favorite horrible movies is Never Too Young to Die. And if you haven't seen it, you need to search it out because it's the best bad movie ever. And John Stamos punched a reporter for asking him about it at one point.
Okay.
So there's that. But yeah, cheese is very near and dear to my heart. And I will stray from it every once in a while. The Warblers was a big departure. There's one scene of gore in the Warblers at all, and it's very mild. It probably would classify as young adult in some circles. So that was sort of a step back from cheesy, in your face, gory pulp to something more quiet and more subtle and more psychological. But generally speaking, I dig the cheese. And in February, I do have another book coming out. It is coming out from Deadite Press on February 15th. It's called Meat Wagon, and it is a return to the cheesy, gory pulp of The Terminal. So if you liked The Terminal, please check out Meat Wagon because I think you'll dig that.
Was food on your mind when you decided to call one of your collections TV dinners from hell?
Yes, that actually has a little bit of a story behind it. They're actually specific TV dinners.
Oh,
So
okay.
when I was a kid, I had younger siblings, and when I was a kid, my sort of reward for babysitting my younger siblings was I would get to watch The Twilight Zone and Outer Limits and Tales from the Dark Side, and that was sort of my like, okay, you took care of the kids, you put them to bed, they had their food, you get your TV dinner, and you get to sit in front of the TV and your sleeping bag and watch these amazing shows that inspired a lot of what I do. And they were Nighthawk TV dinners in specific, which you can't find outside of Texas, which is where I was living at the time.
Oh, okay. See, I always think about those
So
kid cuisines with the little penguin. Like that was those were like the TV those were like the TV dinners that I always crave.
yeah, KC, and they usually had the colored sprinkles that would change color in the applesauce. Yeah. But no, Nighthawks were where it was at. Nighthawks still have a place in my heart. Anytime I'm in Texas, I have to find a grocery store and they have to find a microwave because Nighthawks are amazing. So if you're in
Fan
Texas, check out Nighthawks.
Nighthawks. All right. I will have to ask my brother-in-law to send me up some Nighthawks.
With dry ice.
All this talk of cheese and TV dinners, of course, reminds me that aside from writing both, weird, languid horror and cheesy, good pulp goodness, you're also a food blogger. You had a podcast for a while that somehow managed to blend food and horror, which can get a little dicey sometimes, I would imagine. So tell us about that.
Sometimes. So I love food. I generally cook food a lot. I like to talk about it. I like to eat it, especially this time of year. We're starting to get into the Halloween season. Pumpkin is everywhere. I usually go on my annual pumpkin spice rant because pumpkin does not belong in pumpkin spice. It's like duck sauce. You put it on pumpkin. It doesn't have pumpkin in it. But anyway, sidetrack there. So yeah, It Cooks was born of my love of food and my love of horror and sort of fusing those things into one because there's a lot of really horrific things you can do with food. And some of the episodes were, a little bit less on the horror side and some of them a little bit more. Um, I make these amazing broken glass cupcakes with Grand Marnier flavored blood syrup. And that's pretty horror-y and also really delicious. So that's a fun thing. But then I was doing one of my favorite ones was Fruity Pebbles cheesecake. I did a riff on the clear pumpkin pie that was going around at one point. Just if I can bring food into it, I probably will. I've been cooking for freaking ever. I've helped people cater weddings. I've done holidays and birthday parties. I've cooked for work events, potlucks, what have you. And I've always really loved to do that. It's just, food is another form of art. And sometimes, you go with the quick and dirty, cheesy, like mac and cheese casseroles and all those other fun things. And then sometimes you want to do the nicer, four-course meal, filet mignon, seared with a little red wine.
As far as sort of the horror dessert kind of combo, do you feel that Kristine McConnell has like helped elevate the discourse around this, or is she kind of the flash in the pan, like distracting from what the true artists are doing?
I think she's helped. I love her stuff. Her show on Netflix is amazing. And I feel like she has sort of made it a little bit more appropriate. Like, Food Network has had shows around Halloween that have been geared towards this. There's Halloween Wars. There's the Great Halloween Baking Championship. I think it's the Ultimate Halloween Baking Championship. And they sort of make it a little bit more. I mean, around Halloween, some of us get our normal decor. I'm wearing Halloween pajamas right now. There's Halloween decorations behind me. Those are up 24/7. It's just the way it goes. But I feel like Kristine McConnell really sort of bridged that gap. And case in point, there's an episode of Nailed It, which is not Halloween themed at all. But there's some pretty serious horror in there with a very creepy clown challenge.
Oh, I just watched that with my daughter. She was disturbingly into it.
That is excellent.
We have a request from the chat line for an explanation of just what is clear pumpkin pie.
Sure. So molecular gastronomy is a thing. It's a very fancy way of making interesting ingredients into sort of weird things. And I believe it was 2017, maybe 2016. I think it was 2017. This amazing chef had used insane amounts of very fancy equipment to make a pumpkin pie that was purely clear. There was a lot of extractives going on. He was doing a lot of really cool science experiments almost to make this perfectly clear pumpkin pie. But one of the food blogs that I'm a big fan of actually broke down the cost, and it was something like $10,000 in order to get all the equipment you'd need for this thing. And I'm not about that. I can do high-end cooking if I want, but I like to make things a little bit more approachable, and that was one of the things I tried to do with It Cooks in specific. I want this to be anybody can make these things. Anybody can have fun with food. You don't have to have a culinary arts degree in order to make something really awesome and really tasty and really impressive for your friends. So I approached it as, okay, I've got a $10 budget. How am I going to make clear pumpkin pie? And I basically used ingredients that you can get pretty much anywhere for a similar effect. Mine was not crystal clear. Mine was more transparent pumpkin pie, but it was still interesting.
Is this something you got a desire to continue and go run back into, or sort of where's your plans for food in the future?
Actually, yes. So I've been working on a couple of things, and definitely it is going to cook again. I'm looking at a visual medium, maybe a YouTube channel, or maybe something on Twitch. I haven't quite decided exactly what I want to do yet. But one of the comments that I kept getting from people about It Cooks was, "Your recipe sounds so amazing. I really wish that I could see that. I wish I could watch you do something." And sometimes there are techniques and things that I was talking about that just don't really come across very well when you're just speaking. So I definitely want to bring that more into the forefront. Also, over the past year, I have moved into a new house and I have a much better kitchen, and I have really worked hard on making my kitchen an amazing space. So it's kind of cool to be able to show it off. So there will definitely be more It Cooks coming at some point in the future.
Well,
So stay
yay.
tuned for that.
One thing I want to swing back around to. So you talked about being in Texas. You talked about being in New England. This Wicked Weird, this New England sort of horror anthology, as a Lovecraft show, as someone who's had to read a lot about New England and Rhode Island, despite having never really spent much time there. Is there really like? Is it just like the Halloween province? Like what's going on with that part of the world?
So there's a lot of really cool stuff in New England. I'm a member of the New England Horror Writers. It's an absolutely phenomenal organization. There's some amazing writers here. Scott Goudsward and David Price and I co-edited the newest New England Horror Writers anthology, Wicked Weird. There's some really great stuff in there. And New England in general, I mean, we've got Salem. There's the Poe statue in Boston, which is hilarious because Poe hated Boston, and yet there's a statue of him right there. So, okay. We've also got, Providence. That's got some pretty historical significance there. And New England is old. New England has old bones and it feels old. There are places that you can walk here and you can feel the history. I mean, when I go to work, I will take walks around the site of the Boston Massacre, and it's just there. And there's some deeply disturbing things that have gone on here, and I feel like that sort of breathed life into the area, especially around the fall. I mean, we have the amazing foliage here, which everybody talks about, but we've also got Salem. The witch trials are very real and very horrible things that happened. And yet the city itself has embraced it in a way that feels almost cartoonish. And it's such a great contrast. You listen to the history. The Witch Dungeon Museum is my favorite. I visit it every year on my birthday just because I have to be there for that. And they talk about the ridiculous, horrible things that happened. Killing people, stealing their land, throwing them in dungeons until they died. This was awful. And then you go outside and there's witch-shaped popsicles, and it's just the dichotomy there. There's no other place like it. I think.
So you recommend it, is what I'm hearing.
Oh, highly. I go every year, at least once a year.
Do you have big Halloween plans for this year?
I don't know. This is going to be the second Halloween in my new house, and sadly, we didn't have a single trick or treater last year.
Oh no.
And our old house, we used to get hundreds and hundreds. They used to bus kids into our old neighborhood. We lived in this really nice little subdivision right next to a park, and they would
Oh,
literally
okay.
like bus kids in, and they'd all park at the park, and then they'd all go walk around the subdivision, and that was cool. And then we moved, and we're on a much more quiet area, and nobody came. So my husband and I were sitting there, we're dressed up, we've got like cases of full-size candy bars next to us. The house is all decked up in lights, and I have the giant praying mantis that sits outside, and nobody came. So I
Oh.
gotta do something, but apparently it's not handing out trick-or-treat candy or terrifying children, because that's pretty fun.
Yeah, our current setup is pretty nice. We've got a long driveway, which some kids sort of have to like look up and be like, is this worth the investment to like go all the way up there? But like our last few houses were sort of in the like behind churches, like sort of built into churches, so we had no one come. It's like, why are we gonna go? I'm not gonna go trick or treat at a church. What's going on? They're gonna give me Bible verses. So so I can
Well, I
understand the
actually got a
parent.
Bible one year. That was
Oh
the worst
really?
thing I ever got in my trick or treat bag.
Oh
Yeah,
no.
I was trick or treating with my siblings, and it was dark. They didn't have a porch light on, and they put something in our bags. We were all really excited because they were heavy, and no, it was like one of those pocket Bibles. And
Yeah,
I will
yeah,
just
yeah.
say that their lawn was covered in pages torn out of those things.
Did you
Just
at least
not a good thing to give children.
did you at least like arrange them in like a pentacle or something just to really,
It wasn't
write home?
me. It wasn't me because I took that thing home and I read it,
Oh,
and there
there
were
we
some
go.
pretty
Okay.
horrific things in it,
I
which was
mean,
interesting.
as far as like old timey horror goes, the Bible's pretty full of good stuff. Giant flaming angels and
Rain of blood.
bears being summoned to eat kids. Like Hammer horror,
Yeah, there's
could have
some
gone to
horror
town.
there.
Well, that's fantastic. So Meatwagon's the next thing that folks can look forward to coming out. What else can folks check out?
Well, I am on Amazon. You can search for me and find basically everything I've ever written. There's also some really great stuff on Audible. The Warblers, especially. Chet Williamson did the audiobook, and he just knocked it out of the park. I get goosebumps when I listen to it. He did such a phenomenal job. So if you like audiobooks, if you have a commute like I do, I would definitely recommend checking out The Warblers on audiobook. The Terminal is also on audiobook, and it's great. The voice actor who plays Dirk, and because the terminal is very first person and it's very point of view, you hear a lot of the monologue going on inside of Dirk's head throughout the book, and the voice actor did a great job on that too, so I recommend that highly.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you to everyone who's been chatting along. A lot of conversations about pies happening in the in the chat.
Awesome.
So, this has been Ask Lovecraft After Dark. If you've enjoyed this program, you can find our whole catalog at asklovecraft.com. There you can also see our sister show, Ask Lovecraft, where I dress up like H.P. Lovecraft for reasons which I and my wife are still trying to ascertain. If you want to follow me online, you can do so at Twitter at Lehman Kessler. There you'll find me screaming into the void on the regular. If you want to learn more about my audio work and also live shows or anything that's going on there, you can go to lehmankessler.com. If you've enjoyed this and any of the other programs, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/asklovecraft. Again, thank you everyone for watching. Amber, thank you so much for coming on. We're looking forward to more of your delicious treats in the future.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye.